constitutional interpretation. I completed my doctorate at Harvard under Professor James Morrison, and I'm excited to bring fresh perspectives to our department's already impressive theoretical foundations. Harvard. Professor Morrison. The name-dropping was subtle but effective, and I watched the senior faculty nod approvingly. Michael had the kind of academic pedigree that opened doors and created assumptions about competence before he'd even proven himself. His father had been a professor, his grandfather had written textbooks that were still used in graduate programs, and his family name appeared on buildings at 3 different universities. I was next. Dr. Rachel Martinez, Middle Eastern Politics and Foreign Policy. I earned my doctorate from the University of Arizona, focusing on diplomatic strategies in post-conflict reconstruction. My research examines how international interventions succeed or fail based on understanding local political dynamics. The response was polite, but noticeably cooler. University of Arizona wasn't Harvard. My surname suggested I might be a diversity hire rather than a merit-based appointment. My research focus on Middle Eastern politics was viewed as trendy rather than foundational. I could feel the subtle assessment happening around the room, the mental categorization that would follow me throughout my time as an assistant professor. But Michael smiled at me after the meeting, and that smile felt like validation. "Your research sounds fascinating," he said, approaching as others filtered out of the conference room. "I've been thinking about how democratic theory applies in post-conflict societies. Maybe we could grab coffee sometime and discuss potential collaboration." Coffee led to lunch. Lunch led to dinner. Within 6 months, we were inseparable, the department's golden couple. Michael was charming and supportive, celebrating my small victories and offering encouragement when experiments failed or articles were rejected. He seemed genuinely interested in my work, asking thoughtful questions about Middle Eastern politics and suggesting connections to his own research on democratic institutions. More importantly, he seemed to see past the barriers that others couldn't quite overcome. While senior faculty still occasionally mispronounced my name or asked me to clarify which affirmative action program had helped me get hired, Michael treated me as an intellectual equal. He introduced me to his network, included me in research projects, and made me feel like I belonged in spaces where I'd previously felt like an outsider. We moved in together after a year, renting a charming colonial house on Elm Street in the faculty neighborhood. The house came with a garden that I'd never had time to maintain, a fireplace we used for hosting dinner parties, and enough bookshelves to accommodate our combined libraries. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was building something permanent, rather than just surviving until the next milestone. Our relationship became the template for academic partnership. We co-authored papers, presented together at conferences, and supported each other through the grinding process of building tenure-worthy research portfolios. Michael helped me navigate department politics, explaining the unwritten rules about which senior faculty members to cultivate and which battles weren't worth fighting. I brought international perspective to his theoretical work, while he provided institutional knowledge that only came from growing up in academic families. The department seemed to approve of our partnership. Dr. Patricia Williams, the department chair, often commented on how well we complemented each other's strengths. Professor Morrison, Michael's mentor and one of the most influential voices in political theory, included both of us in his informal salon where senior scholars discussed emerging trends in the field. Even the university president, Dr. Robert Hayes, knew us as a couple and occasionally invited us to events where faculty mingled with donors and trustees. I thought we were building toward marriage, shared tenure-track appointments, and the kind of academic power couple status that would anchor our careers for decades. Michael talked about our future with the same confidence he brought to everything else, discussing sabbatical plans and research projects that assumed we'd be together indefinitely. When colleagues asked about our timeline for marriage, he'd joke that academics move slowly but deliberately in all things. The first crack in our perfect foundation appeared during my 3rd year, though I didn't recognize it as significant at the time. Michael had been selected to teach the department's prestigious graduate seminar in political theory, a course that typically launched promising doctoral students toward academic careers. It was a coveted assignment that combined teaching excellence with mentoring responsibilities, and Michael approached it with characteristic enthusiasm. That's when Stephanie Cole entered our lives. 24 years old, blonde, brilliant, and eager to impress her distinguished professor, Stephanie represented everything that made academic relationships complicated. She was working on her master's thesis in democratic theory under Michael's supervision, and her research showed genuine promise. More troubling, she showed genuine interest in Michael that went beyond purely academic admiration. I noticed it first during department social events. Stephanie would position herself near Michael, laughing at his jokes with slightly too much enthusiasm, and asking follow-up questions that extended conversations beyond what was necessary. She dressed more carefully for his classes than for others, and her office hours requests always seemed to run longer than scheduled. Michael dismissed my concerns when I mentioned them gently. "She's just an eager student," he said, not looking up from the papers he was grading. "You remember what it was like to work with professors who inspired you. Sometimes enthusiasm looks like flirtation when you're not used to having gifted students." I wanted to believe him, partly because the alternative was too threatening to consider seriously. But I also recognized that Michael enjoyed Stephanie's attention in ways that made me uncomfortable. He mentioned her insights more frequently in department meetings, praised her contributions to seminar discussions, and began spending additional time helping her refine her thesis proposal. The change in our relationship was gradual but unmistakable. Michael became less available for our usual dinner conversations about research and department politics. He worked later in his office, claiming that graduate student supervision required more time than he'd anticipated. Our weekend routines shifted, as he found excuses to check email or review student work, instead of spending unstructured time together. Most concerning, he stopped asking for my input on his research. For 3 years, I'd been his primary sounding board for developing ideas, refining arguments, and identifying potential weaknesses in his theoretical frameworks. Suddenly, he was working with someone else whose fresh perspective energized him in ways that my familiar insights, apparently, no longer could. I tried addressing the issue directly, choosing a quiet Sunday morning when we were both home and relaxed. "I feel like we're not connecting the way we used to," I said, sitting across from him at our kitchen table. "You seem distracted, and I'm wondering if there's something we should talk about." Michael looked genuinely surprised by my concern. "I've just been focused on the graduate seminar. Teaching at that level requires more preparation than I expected, and I want to make sure I'm giving students the attention they deserve." "Is it all students? Or one student in particular?" The question hung between us, and I watched Michael's expression shift from surprise to something that might have been guilt or irritation. "Rachel, that's not fair. Stephanie is a talented researcher, but she's my student. I would never compromise professional boundaries." But he didn't deny that she was receiving special attention. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Didn't acknowledge that his behavior had changed or that our relationship had suffered as a result of his increased investment in her academic development. Instead, he deflected by questioning my motives for bringing up the subject. "I think you're feeling insecure about your own progress toward tenure," he said, reaching across the table to touch my hand with what was probably intended as reassurance. "You've been working so hard on your Middle Eastern research that you might be projecting anxiety onto other areas of your life." The dismissal stung, partly because it contained just enough truth to make me question my own perceptions. I was feeling anxious about tenure, as every assistant professor did during their 4th year, when the pressure to produce significant publications intensified. Maybe I was seeing threats where none existed. Maybe my working-class background made me more sensitive to signs of exclusion or replacement. I decided to trust Michael and focus on my own career development. I threw myself into research with renewed intensity, spending longer hours in the library, traveling to conferences where I could present my work, and developing relationships with scholars at other institutions who might provide external validation for my tenure case. The strategy worked, at least professionally. My research on diplomatic strategies in post-conflict regions began attracting attention from policymakers and international relations scholars. I published 3 articles in top-tier journals, received invitations to speak at major conferences, and won a competitive research grant that funded fieldwork in Jordan and Lebanon. But while my career flourished, my relationship with Michael continued deteriorating in ways that became increasingly difficult to ignore. He missed my conference presentations, claiming scheduling conflicts that never seemed to affect his ability to attend events where Stephanie was presenting. He forgot important dates like the anniversary of our first publication together, but remembered details about Stephanie's thesis progress that he shared enthusiastically during dinner conversations. Most painfully, he stopped celebrating my achievements with the enthusiasm that had once made every small victory feel significant. When I received notice that my article on Lebanese reconstruction had been accepted by International Security, one of the most prestigious journals in our field, Michael's response was politely congratulatory, rather than genuinely excited. "That's great, Rachel," he said, looking up briefly from his laptop. "I know how hard you worked on that piece." 3 years earlier, an acceptance like that would have prompted dinner at our favorite restaurant and a weekend celebration. Now it rated less attention than Stephanie's successful defense of her thesis proposal. The end came on a Thursday evening in November, exactly 3 years ago, from the tenure review meeting where Michael now sat waiting for my decision. I'd been working late in my office, preparing for a lecture on American foreign policy in the Middle East, when I decided to surprise Michael by bringing dinner to his office. We hadn't eaten together in weeks due to our conflicting schedules, and I thought a spontaneous gesture might help reconnect us. Hamilton Hall was nearly empty by 7 o'clock, with most faculty and students having left for the day. Michael's office was on the second floor, and I could see light under his door as I climbed the stairs with takeout from the Thai restaurant we'd frequented during our early dating days. I knocked gently, then opened the door when I heard his voice calling, "Come in." What I found destroyed 3.5 years of trust, partnership, and shared dreams in a single moment. Michael and Stephanie were not engaged in anything explicitly inappropriate, but their body language told a story that no amount of professional rationalization could explain. They sat close together on the small couch in his office, papers spread between them, but their attention focused entirely on each other. Stephanie's hand rested on Michael's arm, and his expression was soft with the kind of intimate attention I hadn't seen directed toward me in months. They separated when I entered, but not quickly enough to hide what had been happening. Michael stood awkwardly, running his hand through his hair in the nervous gesture I knew meant he was calculating how to manage a difficult situation. Stephanie gathered her papers with flushed cheeks and avoided making eye contact with me. "Rachel," Michael said, his voice carrying forced casualness. "I didn't expect you. Stephanie and I were just reviewing her thesis revisions." I looked at the papers scattered on the couch, noting that they were sitting far closer together than any academic consultation required. I saw the way Stephanie was looking at Michael, with the possessive confidence of someone who knew she was winning a competition I hadn't realized I was in. "I brought dinner," I said quietly, holding up the bag of Thai food that suddenly felt ridiculous in my hands. "But I can see you're busy." "We were just finishing up," Stephanie said, speaking directly to me for the first time in months. Her tone was polite but carried undertones of triumph that made my chest tighten, with recognition of how completely the dynamics had shifted. I left the food on Michael's desk and walked out of Hamilton Hall, through the campus that had felt like home for 4 years, and back to the house on Elm Street where everything reminded me of the future I'd thought we were building together. Michael came home 2 hours later, and the conversation that followed confirmed what I'd already understood from that single moment in his office. "This isn't working anymore," he said, sitting across from me in our living room, with the careful distance of someone who'd already made his decision. "We've grown in different directions, and I think we both deserve to find relationships that challenge us in new ways." The clinical language was meant to soften the blow, but it only made the rejection more insulting. We hadn't grown in different directions. He'd chosen to grow towards someone else while allowing our relationship to wither through neglect. The challenges he was seeking weren't intellectual or professional. They were the excitement of conquering someone young and impressionable who looked at him with uncomplicated admiration. "Is this about Stephanie?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Michael paused, and in that pause I heard confirmation of everything I'd suspected and tried to dismiss for months. "Stephanie and I have developed feelings for each other," he said finally. "I didn't plan for it to happen, but I can't ignore what I'm feeling." Feelings. As if this was a cosmic accident rather than a series of choices he'd made to prioritize another woman's attention over our partnership. As if the months of emotional distance, missed celebrations, and forgotten anniversaries were just unfortunate side effects of uncontrollable emotions, rather than deliberate preparation for this moment. "How long?" I asked. It doesn't matter how long. What matters is that it would be unfair to both of you for me to pretend these feelings don't exist. But it did matter, because the timeline would reveal how much of our recent relationship had been a lie. It mattered because I needed to understand how long I'd been living with someone who was actively choosing someone else while pretending to choose me. It mattered because the depth of his betrayal would determine how completely I needed to rebuild not just my personal life, but my professional identity in a department where our relationship had been public knowledge. The next morning, Michael packed his clothes and books while I sat in our kitchen drinking coffee and watching 4 years of shared life get reduced to boxes and suitcases. He was moving in with a colleague temporarily, he explained, until he and Stephanie could find appropriate housing that wouldn't create appearances of impropriety. The irony was stunning. He was worried about appearances after months of inappropriate emotional intimacy, as if moving out of our shared home would somehow retroactively make his behavior professional. I hope we can remain collegial, he said as he loaded the last box into his car. The department doesn't need to be affected by our personal situation. Collegial. The word felt like acid in my mouth. Michael was asking me to pretend that our breakup was amicable, to protect his reputation while I dealt with the humiliation of being publicly replaced by his student. He wanted me to smooth over any awkwardness that might arise from his choice to pursue a relationship that raised obvious questions about professional ethics and power dynamics. I nodded because I didn't trust myself to speak, but I was already beginning to understand that collegiality would be the least of Michael's concerns once I decided how to respond to his betrayal. The next few weeks passed in a blur of practical adjustments and emotional devastation. I had to find a new place to live since I couldn't afford the Elm Street house on a single assistant professor salary. I moved into a small apartment near campus, trading the garden and fireplace for efficiency and independence. I had to navigate department social events, where Michael and Stephanie's relationship was the source of barely concealed gossip and speculation. Most painfully, I had to watch my professional network shift, as colleagues calculated which side of the divorce would be more beneficial to their own careers. Michael's Harvard connections and family name carried more weight than my research accomplishments and work ethic, and several faculty members who'd been friendly during our relationship became noticeably cooler toward me as a single woman with fewer networking advantages. Dr. Patricia Williams called me into her office during the second week after our separation, ostensibly to check on my well-being but actually to assess potential damage to department harmony. "These situations are always difficult," she said with the tone of someone who dealt with faculty relationship drama before. "I hope you and Michael can maintain professional boundaries that allow everyone to focus on their work." Professional boundaries. Another way of saying that I should absorb the personal cost of Michael's choices without creating any inconvenience for others. I was expected to attend faculty meetings where he and Stephanie sat together, to collaborate on committee work without revealing any bitterness about his betrayal, and to pretend that nothing significant had changed in my professional environment. "Of course," I replied, because assistant professors don't have the luxury of making demands or expressing inconvenient emotions. My personal life won't affect my commitment to the department. But privately, I was beginning to understand that maintaining professional boundaries wasn't enough. If I wanted to survive and eventually thrive in an environment where Michael's presence would be a constant reminder of my humiliation, I needed to do more than just endure. I needed to build something larger than my personal pain, something that would transform this temporary defeat into lasting power. That night, sitting in my small apartment surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and looking out at a campus that no longer felt like home, I made a decision that would shape the next 3 years of my life. I would not just survive Michael's betrayal, I would use it as motivation to achieve the kind of academic success that would make him irrelevant to my future. I had no idea, as I sat there planning my comeback, that I was beginning a journey that would eventually place Michael's entire career in my hands. I couldn't have imagined that the humiliation I felt in that moment would become the foundation for a transformation that would leave him begging for mercy I wasn't sure I wanted to give. But that night I started keeping a journal. And in that journal I began documenting everything. The call came on a Wednesday morning in late March, just as cherry blossoms were beginning to bloom across Westfield's campus. President Hayes's voice carried the formal gravity appropriate for delivering news that would reshape institutional leadership and my entire professional trajectory. Rachel, I'm pleased to inform you that the search committee has unanimously recommended your appointment as Dean of Faculty, and the Board of Trustees has enthusiastically endorsed that recommendation. If you're willing to accept the position, we'd like to announce your appointment next week, with the deanship beginning officially on July 1st. The moment felt simultaneously surreal and inevitable. 3 years after Michael's betrayal had destroyed my illusions about academic fairness and meritocracy, I was being offered exactly the kind of institutional power that would allow me to reshape the environment that had once seemed designed to exclude people like me. I'm honored by the confidence you've shown in my capabilities, I replied, maintaining professional composure while internally celebrating the culmination of the most sustained strategic campaign of my life. I accept the position and look forward to working with you to advance Westfield's academic mission and institutional excellence. President Hayes outlined the transition timeline and administrative protocols, but I was already calculating the implications for the tenure review process that would begin the following week. As incoming Dean of Faculty, I would have primary responsibility for evaluating promotion cases and making recommendations to the Board of Trustees about faculty advancement. Michael's tenure review was scheduled for the second week of April, exactly 3 weeks after my dean appointment would be publicly announced. The timing was perfect in ways that seemed orchestrated by whatever gods governed academic politics and personal vindication. The announcement of my appointment created immediate ripple effects throughout campus. Faculty members who had supported my candidacy celebrated the selection of someone who understood both academic culture and external engagement priorities. Department chairs who had worked with me on international initiatives expressed enthusiasm about enhanced resources and opportunities that would come with having an experienced fundraiser in senior administration. But the announcement also generated resistance from faculty members who viewed my rapid advancement as threatening to traditional promotion norms. Dr. Patricia Williams was among the most vocal critics, though she maintained diplomatic language that avoided direct criticism of the selection process. While Dr. Martinez has achieved impressive external recognition, Williams observed during a faculty senate discussion of the appointment, we should ensure that administrative leadership positions continue to require demonstrated commitment to established academic standards and institutional governance procedures. The criticism was predictable but strategically irrelevant. Williams was essentially arguing that traditional academic credentials should matter more than proven ability to generate resources and enhance institutional effectiveness. But university leadership had already rejected that framework by selecting me over candidates who possessed conventional qualifications but lacked external relationships and revenue generation capabilities. More importantly, Williams had revealed her own strategic limitations by continuing to fight battles that had already been decided at higher levels of institutional hierarchy. While she focused on defending traditional promotion standards, I was building relationships with board members and external stakeholders who controlled university resources and strategic direction. Dr. Susan Clark brought me intelligence about internal faculty reactions during one of our coffee meetings the week after my appointment was announced. Most people are impressed by your accomplishments and excited about possibilities for enhanced external funding, she reported. But there's definitely anxiety about whether you'll understand faculty perspectives and respect academic autonomy. The concerns were legitimate and would need to be addressed through careful attention to faculty governance and collaborative decision-making processes. But they also reflected broader uncertainty about changing academic culture and the increasing importance of external relationships for institutional sustainability. What about reaction from political science specifically? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Susan smiled knowingly. Patricia is frustrated, obviously. She'd been positioning herself as a potential candidate for senior administration, so your appointment blocks her advancement while also representing exactly the kind of rapid promotion she's been arguing against. The information confirmed my assessment that Williams' resistance was motivated by personal ambition as much as principled concerns about academic standards. She'd been building toward her own candidacy for administrative leadership, and my success represented both a professional setback and a philosophical challenge to her approach to career development. But Williams was also dealing with broader implications for departmental dynamics. My appointment as Dean of Faculty meant that her authority as department chair would be subject to my oversight and evaluation. The woman she'd systematically marginalized 3 years earlier would now have direct influence over her own professional advancement and administrative effectiveness. The irony was delicious, but I was more interested in long-term institutional success than personal vindication. Williams was a competent administrator who understood departmental operations, and her cooperation would be valuable for maintaining academic quality while implementing new initiatives for external engagement and revenue generation. Michael's reaction to my appointment was more complex and revealing. He approached me after a faculty meeting with the careful demeanor of someone attempting to navigate dramatically shifted power dynamics while maintaining professional dignity. "Congratulations on your appointment," he said, extending his hand with formal courtesy that couldn't quite mask his underlying uncertainty about what my elevation meant for his own situation. "I'm sure you'll do excellent work advancing university interests." The interaction was fascinating because it revealed how completely Michael had misunderstood the strategic implications of our changed relationship. He was treating my appointment as a professional achievement that didn't affect him personally, rather than recognizing that his upcoming tenure review would be evaluated by someone who had intimate knowledge of his character limitations and professional inadequacies. "Thank you," I replied with equal formality. "I'm looking forward to working with all faculty members to enhance academic excellence and institutional effectiveness." The conversation was brief and superficial, but it confirmed that Michael remained oblivious to how thoroughly the power dynamics had shifted since our divorce. While I'd spent 3 years building external relationships and demonstrating institutional value, he'd focused on satisfying traditional tenure requirements, without understanding that the criteria for academic success were evolving in ways that made his approach increasingly obsolete. The weeks between my appointment announcement and Michael's tenure review passed quickly as I prepared for the transition to senior administration, while also managing ongoing responsibilities with the Center for International Affairs. President Hayes arranged for briefings with current deans about administrative procedures and institutional priorities, while board members provided perspective on strategic challenges and opportunities facing university leadership. But my most important preparation involved reviewing personnel files and promotion cases that would require attention during my first year as dean of faculty. The review process provided comprehensive insight into faculty accomplishments, departmental dynamics, and institutional standards that would guide my approach to academic leadership. Michael's tenure file was particularly instructive. His research productivity was adequate, but unexceptional, with publications in respected journals that demonstrated competence without achieving significant impact or influence. His teaching evaluations were consistently positive but not outstanding, reflecting solid classroom performance without the kind of innovation or inspiration that distinguished excellent educators. Most telling, his service contributions were minimal and self-serving. He'd fulfilled required committee obligations while avoiding assignments that demanded significant time investment or involved potential controversy. His approach to institutional citizenship reflected exactly the kind of strategic careerism that prioritized personal advancement over collaborative commitment to academic mission. The file also contained external evaluation letters from senior scholars in political theory who had been asked to assess Michael's research contributions and professional reputation. The letters were politely supportive, but notably lacking in enthusiasm or strong endorsement. "Dr. Bennett has produced solid scholarship that meets standards for tenure at institutions with comparable expectations," wrote one evaluator. "His work demonstrates adequate familiarity with relevant literature and appropriate methodological rigor." Adequate. The word appeared repeatedly in external assessments that praised Michael's competence, while stopping short of claiming distinction or significance. The evaluations revealed exactly what I'd suspected. Michael's work was sufficient for promotion under traditional standards, but it lacked the excellence and impact that justified advancement in increasingly competitive academic environments. The contrast with evaluation criteria that had guided my own career development was stark. While Michael had focused on meeting minimum requirements for tenure, I'd concentrated on exceeding expectations for institutional value and external recognition. The different approaches had produced dramatically different outcomes that would soon be evaluated by the same administrative leadership. The Tenure Review Committee meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in mid-April. The committee included representatives from across academic divisions, along with external members who provided perspective from other institutions. As Dean of Faculty, I would chair the meeting and make final recommendations about promotion cases to President Hayes and the Board of Trustees. I arrived at the conference room early, arranging materials and reviewing procedures while reflecting on the extraordinary trajectory that had brought me to this moment. 3 years earlier, I'd been the discarded wife of an ambitious academic, excluded from departmental power and dismissed as professionally irrelevant. Now I controlled the institutional process that would determine Michael's career advancement and professional future. The committee members arrived promptly, taking their seats around the mahogany conference table that had witnessed countless faculty promotion discussions over decades of university history. Several members nodded respectfully as I called the meeting to order, recognizing the significance of my first tenure review as Dean of Faculty. We're here to evaluate Dr. Michael Bennett's application for promotion to Associate Professor with tenure in the Political Science Department, I began, maintaining the formal tone appropriate for such serious institutional business. The committee has received Dr. Bennett's complete file, including research portfolio, teaching evaluations, service record, and external assessment letters. I'd like to begin with discussion of his scholarly contributions. The conversation that followed was thorough and professional, with committee members raising questions about research impact, teaching effectiveness, and service commitment that reflected their collective expertise and institutional knowledge. Michael's work was evaluated according to established criteria without regard for personal relationships or political considerations. But as the discussion progressed, it became clear that Michael's candidacy was problematic in ways that extended beyond simple adequacy concerns. His research productivity had declined in recent years, with fewer publications and reduced external engagement that suggested diminishing intellectual vitality. His teaching had become routine and predictable, lacking the innovation and energy that characterized excellent university instruction. Most importantly, his service contributions were inadequate for someone seeking permanent appointment to university faculty. Michael had avoided challenging assignments and declined opportunities for institutional leadership that would have demonstrated commitment to academic citizenship and collaborative governance. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who served on the committee as a representative from social sciences, articulated concerns that several members had been considering throughout the evaluation process. While Dr. Bennett meets basic requirements for tenure consideration, she observed, I'm troubled by the pattern of declining engagement and minimal service contribution. Faculty members who receive permanent appointments should demonstrate growing commitment to institutional mission rather than simply satisfying minimum criteria. The criticism was devastating because it came from a respected colleague who understood both academic standards and institutional expectations. Jennifer wasn't questioning Michael's competence. She was challenging his dedication to the collaborative work that made university communities function effectively. Other committee members raised similar concerns about research impact, teaching innovation, and service leadership. The consensus that emerged was that Michael's candidacy represented exactly the kind of adequate but uninspiring performance that universities were trying to move beyond in competitive academic environments. As committee chair, I guided the discussion while carefully avoiding any appearance of personal bias or conflict of interest. My role was to ensure thorough evaluation based on institutional standards rather than individual preferences or relationships. But I also understood that the committee's assessment reflected objective evaluation of Michael's qualifications according to criteria that had been established through faculty governance processes. The fact that those criteria revealed serious limitations in his candidacy wasn't my fault. It was simply the natural consequence of his approach to academic career development. The final vote was closer than I'd expected but decisive enough to provide clear guidance for administrative action. 5 committee members supported denial of tenure, 3 supported approval with reservations, and 2 supported unqualified approval. The outcome reflected genuine uncertainty about Michael's qualifications, rather than predetermined opposition to his advancement. As Dean of Faculty, I was responsible for making final recommendations to President Hayes based on committee input and my own assessment of institutional standards and strategic priorities. The decision was mine to make, and everyone in the room understood the significance of that authority. Based on committee discussion and evaluation of Dr. Bennett's complete file, I said, maintaining steady voice that betrayed none of the satisfaction I felt about this moment of complete professional vindication, I recommend denial of tenure for Dr. Michael Bennett. While his work demonstrates adequate competence in research and teaching, It lacks the excellence and institutional commitment that justify permanent appointment to Westfield faculty. The silence that followed my recommendation lasted perhaps 10 seconds but felt much longer. Committee members understood they had just witnessed the conclusion of a process that would end Michael's academic career at Westfield, while confirming the institutional authority of someone who had been systematically excluded from departmental power just 3 years earlier. The meeting concluded with discussion of notification procedures and timeline for appeals process. Michael would receive official notification within 48 hours, with his appointment terminating at the end of the current academic year. He would have opportunities to appeal the decision through faculty governance channels, but such appeals rarely succeeded when supported by thorough committee evaluation and administrative recommendation. As committee members filed out of the conference room, Dr. Jennifer Walsh approached with expression that combined professional respect and personal admiration. "That was handled perfectly," she said quietly. "You maintained complete objectivity while ensuring thorough evaluation according to established standards. No one can question the fairness or integrity of the process." The validation was important, not just for personal satisfaction, but for establishing credibility as an academic leader who could manage difficult personnel decisions with appropriate professionalism and institutional loyalty. My first major decision as Dean of Faculty had demonstrated both competence and character in ways that would influence how faculty members viewed my administrative approach. But the real satisfaction came from recognizing how completely the power dynamics had shifted since Michael's betrayal. The man who had dismissed me as professionally irrelevant was now subject to my institutional authority. The colleague who had questioned my academic qualifications was being denied tenure based on my assessment of his inadequacies. I walked back to my office through campus that was now truly mine to shape and influence, reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had transformed personal devastation into professional triumph. The cherry blossoms that had greeted my appointment announcement were giving way to spring foliage that symbolized renewal and growth. The next morning brought the predictable aftermath of institutional drama. Michael requested a meeting to discuss the tenure decision, arriving at my office with the careful demeanor of someone seeking to understand how his academic career had been derailed so completely. "I don't understand what happened," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk with visible confusion and suppressed frustration. "My research meets departmental standards, my teaching evaluations are consistently positive, and I've fulfilled all service requirements. What did I miss?" The question revealed exactly how thoroughly Michael had misunderstood both institutional expectations and his own professional limitations. He was still thinking in terms of minimum requirements rather than excellent standards, still assuming that adequate performance justified advancement, rather than understanding that competitive environments demanded distinction and leadership. "The committee evaluated your qualifications according to established criteria for tenure and promotion," I replied with clinical precision that avoided personal interpretation or emotional engagement. "Their assessment was that your work, while competent, doesn't demonstrate the level of excellence and institutional commitment expected for permanent faculty appointment." Michael stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him processing the implications of our reversed positions. The woman he'd left for his graduate student was now the institutional authority, determining his professional fate. The colleague he dismissed as emotionally unsuited for serious academic work was demonstrating exactly the kind of strategic leadership that university administration valued most highly. "This is about our personal history," he said finally, his voice carrying accusation and disbelief. "You're using administrative authority to settle personal scores." The charge was predictable, but also strategically foolish. Michael was essentially arguing that institutional decisions should ignore objective evaluation criteria in favor of personal relationships and individual preferences. He was claiming that his tenure case deserved approval based on considerations that had nothing to do with academic merit or institutional value. "Dr. Bennett," I replied, emphasizing the formal title that established appropriate professional distance, "tenure decisions are based on academic qualifications and institutional standards, not personal relationships. The committee's recommendation reflects careful evaluation of your research productivity, teaching effectiveness, and service contributions according to criteria established through faculty governance processes." The response was both accurate and strategically calculated. I was positioning Michael's criticism as an attack on institutional integrity and faculty governance, rather than legitimate questioning of administrative decision-making. His attempt to personalize the tenure denial was actually undermining his credibility and demonstrating exactly the kind of unprofessional judgment that justified the committee's assessment. Michael left my office that morning with the defeated posture of someone who had finally understood how completely he'd been outmaneuvered by an opponent he'd never taken seriously. But his departure also marked the beginning of my tenure as Dean of Faculty, a position that would allow me to implement the vision for academic leadership that had motivated my 3-year campaign for institutional power. The transformation of Westfield's academic culture over the following months exceeded even my optimistic projections for institutional change. Faculty members who had felt marginalized by traditional promotion standards discovered new opportunities for recognition and advancement based on external engagement and practical impact. Department chairs learned to prioritize revenue generation and alumni relationship building alongside scholarly publication and disciplinary reputation. Most importantly, the university attracted national attention for innovative approaches to academic leadership and institutional effectiveness. Board members who had supported my appointment were vindicated by measurable improvements in fundraising, faculty recruitment, and external recognition that enhanced Westfield's competitive position among elite institutions. Dr. Patricia Williams adapted to the new environment with characteristic pragmatism, recognizing that resistance to changed administrative priorities would only marginalize her further from institutional leadership. She began incorporating external engagement expectations into departmental planning, while also developing alumni relationship initiatives that generated significant donations for political science programs. The adaptation was impressive and strategically intelligent. Williams understood that successful academic careers required flexibility and responsiveness to evolving institutional priorities, rather than rigid adherence to traditional standards that were becoming less relevant to university competitiveness. 2 years after my appointment as Dean of Faculty, Westfield received recognition from the Association of American Universities for excellence in international programming and external engagement. The award cited our innovative approaches to academic policy collaboration, successful alumni relationship building, and effective integration of scholarly research with practical implementation. The recognition represented validation not just of individual accomplishments but of institutional transformation that had repositioned Westfield as a leader in 21st century higher education. We had demonstrated that academic excellence and practical impact were complementary rather than competing priorities, and that universities could enhance both scholarly reputation and financial sustainability through strategic external relationship building. Michael completed his terminal year at Westfield with minimal fanfare, accepting a visiting position at a regional university, where his adequate research and teaching would meet institutional needs without requiring the kind of excellence and leadership that competitive institutions increasingly demanded. His departure closed the final chapter of our shared academic history, while confirming the wisdom of institutional decisions that prioritized competence over connections. But the most satisfying validation came from unexpected sources. Professor James Morrison, Michael's former mentor, who had initially underestimated my capabilities, sent a personal note congratulating me on the university's international recognition and acknowledging the vision and leadership that had made such achievements possible. "Your transformation of Westfield's approach to academic engagement has been remarkable," Morrison wrote. "You've demonstrated exactly the kind of innovative leadership that higher education needs to remain relevant and effective in changing global environments." The praise was meaningful because it came from someone who represented traditional academic authority and had witnessed my evolution from marginalized faculty wife to institutional leader. Morrison's acknowledgement confirmed that my success was recognized and respected, even by establishment figures who might have been expected to resist such rapid advancement. 5 years after Michael's betrayal had shattered my illusions about academic fairness and meritocracy, I stood in my dean's office overlooking the campus that had become truly mine to shape and influence. The cherry blossoms were blooming again, marking another spring of renewal and growth in an institutional culture that now reflected my values and vision. The journal I'd started during those dark months after our divorce filled several volumes, documenting every slight, every exclusion, every moment when I'd felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. But it also recorded the systematic building of relationships, credentials, and institutional value that had transformed personal devastation into professional triumph. Reading through those early entries reminded me of how completely the power dynamics had shifted since Michael's confident assumption that I would accept marginalization and exclusion without resistance. He'd underestimated my strategic intelligence, my capacity for sustained planning, and my ability to build alternative sources of validation and influence. But more importantly, he'd misunderstood the changing criteria for academic success in environments where external relationships and practical impact mattered more than traditional scholarly credentials and institutional connections. While he'd focused on satisfying minimum requirements for advancement, I'd concentrated on exceeding expectations for institutional value and leadership capability. The victory was complete in ways that exceeded my original expectations for personal vindication. I hadn't just survived Michael's betrayal and the systematic undermining that followed. I'd used those experiences as motivation for transformation that positioned me among the most successful academic leaders of my generation. The woman who had once sat silently at department meetings while her husband's colleagues dismissed her contributions was now setting institutional policy and shaping academic culture for one of the nation's most prestigious universities. The scholar who had been excluded from important decisions was now making final determinations about faculty advancement and institutional strategy. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. Sometimes it's about building something so much better than what they created that they have no choice but to acknowledge your superiority while working within systems you designed to reflect values they never understood or appreciated. Michael Bennett had taught me that in academic environments only power mattered. He'd been right about that lesson, but wrong about who would ultimately master its application. The game was over, and I had won so completely that the victory transformed not just my individual career but the institutional culture that had once seemed designed to exclude people like me. The future stretched ahead with unlimited possibilities for continued growth and influence, guided by hard-earned wisdom about how real power operates in academic institutions, and sustained by confidence that comes from surviving the worst that institutional politics can inflict while emerging stronger than ever. Justice had been served, excellence had been rewarded, and the woman who had once been dismissed as professionally irrelevant was now shaping the careers and futures of colleagues who had learned to respect both her judgment and her authority. The transformation was complete. The transformation began on a humid Tuesday morning in September, when I returned to Westfield's campus carrying secrets that would reshape everything my colleagues thought they understood about institutional power. My year at Brookings had armed me with more than enhanced credentials and policy experience. I possessed a sophisticated understanding of how academic institutions actually functioned beneath their surface rhetoric about merit and collaboration. Dr. Patricia Williams greeted my return with carefully orchestrated enthusiasm during our reunion meeting in her office. The space looked exactly as I remembered, with its imposing desk, framed degrees, and strategic arrangement of academic journals that projected scholarly authority. But sitting across from Williams after 12 months of briefing cabinet officials and consulting with foundation presidents, I recognized how provincial her power base actually was. "Your fellowship year has certainly enhanced your profile," Williams observed, leafing through copies of my policy publications with the careful attention of someone calculating their implications. "The State Department work in particular seems to have generated significant visibility. I trust you're eager to refocus on departmental responsibilities and prepare for your tenure review." Her tone carried subtle warning beneath the congratulatory language. Williams was reminding me that external accomplishments meant nothing without internal approval, that my year away from campus politics had potentially weakened, rather than strengthened my position within the only hierarchy that mattered for academic advancement. I smiled and nodded with appropriate deference, while mentally cataloging the numerous ways her assessment revealed fundamental misunderstanding of how modern universities actually operated. Williams was still thinking in terms of departmental control over faculty careers, unaware that I'd spent the previous year building relationships with people who controlled the resources that departments desperately needed to maintain their programs and positions. "I'm grateful for the opportunity to contribute my international experience to departmental initiatives," I replied, maintaining the tone of humble enthusiasm that Williams expected from junior faculty. The fellowship provided wonderful preparation for enhancing our program's policy relevance and external partnerships. What Williams couldn't know was that my external partnerships now included direct relationships with university trustees, government officials, and foundation leaders who viewed Westfield's political science department as one small component of much larger strategic objectives. While she focused on managing internal faculty dynamics, I'd learned to operate in environments where departments competed for attention and resources from leadership, who measured value in terms of institutional impact rather than scholarly reputation. My first strategic move was so subtle that most colleagues missed its significance entirely. I volunteered to coordinate the department's response to a new university initiative on global engagement, offering to leverage my international connections to develop programming that would enhance Westfield's competitive position. The assignment seemed like routine service work that would consume time without generating personal benefit. But the Global Engagement Initiative had been designed by President Hayes to identify faculty members who could build the kind of external relationships that trustees increasingly demanded from academic programs. My willingness to take leadership on international programming signaled exactly the kind of institutional commitment that senior administration was seeking from faculty who aspired to advancement beyond traditional promotion tracks. More importantly, coordinating global engagement gave me legitimate reasons to meet regularly with university leadership, alumni relations staff, and development officers who controlled resources that dwarfed anything available through departmental channels. While my colleagues focused on internal committee work and teaching assignments, I was building relationships with people who made decisions about institutional priorities and resource allocation. The intelligence I gathered through these administrative connections was invaluable for understanding how promotion decisions were actually made at the highest levels of university hierarchy. I learned that traditional academic credentials were increasingly viewed as necessary but insufficient qualifications for faculty advancement. University leadership was prioritizing candidates who demonstrated ability to generate external funding, build alumni relationships, and enhance institutional reputation through media engagement and policy influence. Dr. Susan Clark provided additional perspective during one of our regular coffee meetings in October. As someone who had successfully navigated promotion to full professor while maintaining strong research productivity, Susan understood both academic culture and institutional politics better than most faculty members. "The university is changing faster than most departments realize," she confided as we discussed my transition back to campus life. "Board members are pressuring administration to demonstrate measurable returns on educational investment. Faculty members who can't articulate the practical value of their work are going to find themselves increasingly marginalized." Susan's observation confirmed what I'd learned during my fellowship year about changing expectations for academic success. Universities were facing competitive pressures that made external engagement and revenue generation essential for institutional sustainability. Faculty members who understood these dynamics would thrive, while those who focused exclusively on traditional scholarly metrics would find their influence diminishing. "Have you noticed changes in how tenure cases are being evaluated?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Absolutely. The days when adequate research and teaching guaranteed promotion are ending. Successful candidates need to demonstrate institutional value through external partnerships, grant funding, or alumni engagement. The criteria aren't officially different, but the bar for what constitutes excellence has been raised significantly. This intelligence was crucial for refining my strategic approach to career development. While Michael continued building his tenure case around traditional metrics of research productivity and teaching effectiveness, I needed to demonstrate the kind of institutional value that would distinguish my candidacy from other assistant professors seeking advancement. My second strategic move involved systematic cultivation of Westfield's alumni network, particularly graduates who had achieved significant success in government, business, and international organizations. Most faculty members maintained minimal contact with alumni beyond occasional guest lecture invitations, viewing such relationships as peripheral to serious academic work. But my fellowship year had taught me that successful alumni represented untapped resources for funding, partnerships, and career opportunities that could transform both individual prospects and institutional capabilities. These graduates possessed exactly the kind of practical expertise and professional networks that universities needed to demonstrate relevance and generate external support. I began hosting monthly breakfast meetings for alumni working in international affairs, creating opportunities for them to reconnect with campus, while also providing me with insights about career trajectories and industry trends that enhanced my teaching and research. The events were positioned as informal networking rather than fundraising, which made participants more comfortable while also allowing organic development of relationships that could benefit everyone involved. The alumni response exceeded my expectations. Graduates who had felt disconnected from campus were eager to engage with faculty members who understood their professional challenges and could facilitate meaningful collaboration between academic research and practical implementation. Within 3 months, I'd built relationships with 47 Westfield alumni, working in international development, foreign policy, and global business operations. Each relationship provided multiple forms of value that strengthened my position both internally and externally. Alumni offered guest lecture opportunities that enhanced my teaching reputation, while also exposing students to career possibilities they hadn't previously considered. They provided consulting opportunities that generated supplemental income, while demonstrating the practical relevance of my research. Most importantly, they began viewing me as their primary connection to Westfield University, which meant that any future institutional development efforts would necessarily involve my participation. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison from Brookings had taught me that academic success increasingly depended on building constituencies beyond university boundaries. The most effective scholars developed relationships with multiple stakeholder groups who valued their expertise for different reasons. Government officials appreciated policy analysis that informed decision-making. Business leaders sought geopolitical insights that enhanced strategic planning. Foundation administrators funded research that addressed social challenges they were mandated to solve. My alumni network was becoming exactly the kind of multi-sector constituency that could provide sustainable support for long-term career development while also generating resources that enhanced institutional value. But more importantly, these relationships were completely independent of departmental politics and immune to the kind of marginalization that Williams and her allies could impose through internal mechanisms. The breakthrough moment came in November, when David Chen contacted me about a crisis in Lebanese banking that was affecting several American companies with Middle Eastern operations. David's bureau at the State Department needed academic analysis of political factors that might influence economic policy decisions. But they also needed someone who could explain complex geopolitical dynamics to business leaders who were evaluating their investment exposure. The request represented exactly the kind of opportunity that demonstrated how external expertise could generate both scholarly credibility and practical impact. I spent 2 weeks developing analysis that combined rigorous academic research with accessible explanation of policy implications for different stakeholder groups. The work resulted in a briefing paper that was circulated among senior State Department officials, a presentation to business leaders at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and an academic article that was accepted by International Security. But the most significant outcome was recognition from people who controlled resources and opportunities that exceeded anything available through traditional academic channels. The State Department retained me as a regular consultant on Middle Eastern affairs. Chamber of Commerce officials invited me to join advisory committees that shaped business engagement with international development initiatives. International security editors asked me to serve as a reviewer for submissions related to conflict resolution and post-war reconstruction. Each opportunity reinforced my reputation as someone who could bridge academic research and practical implementation, while also providing access to networks that were completely independent of Westfield's internal politics. I was building what Elizabeth Morrison had called portfolio careers, that drew value from multiple sources, rather than depending exclusively on university approval and advancement. Meanwhile, Michael's approach to tenure preparation revealed how thoroughly he misunderstood the changing criteria for academic success. He continued focusing on traditional metrics of research productivity and teaching effectiveness, while remaining oblivious to external relationship building that was becoming essential for institutional advancement. His research on American political theory was competent but had minimal influence on policy discussions or public understanding of democratic institutions. His teaching was adequate but not innovative, and his service contributions were strategic but self-serving. Most importantly, his work generated no external interest or financial support for university programs. The contrast with my developing profile was becoming increasingly obvious to university leadership, who evaluated faculty contributions to institutional mission and strategic objectives. While Michael satisfied minimum requirements for tenure consideration, I was exceeding expectations for external engagement and revenue generation that senior administration increasingly valued. Dr. Jennifer Walsh from Economics provided additional perspective on changing promotion standards during a faculty workshop on grant funding strategies. Jennifer had successfully built external partnerships with government agencies and international organizations that enhanced both her research capabilities and her institutional value. Universities are competing for resources in ways that make external relationships essential for sustainability, she explained during our small group discussion. Faculty members who can demonstrate practical impact and generate external funding are going to have significant advantages in promotion processes, regardless of their publication records. Jennifer's observation confirmed what I'd learned through my alumni networking and consulting work. Academic success was increasingly measured by ability to translate scholarly expertise into practical value that benefited multiple stakeholder groups. Faculty members who understood this evolution would thrive, while those who focused exclusively on traditional metrics would find themselves increasingly marginalized. But Jennifer also warned about potential resistance from colleagues who viewed external engagement as intellectually compromising or professionally inappropriate. Some faculty members will argue that consulting and policy work distracts from serious scholarship, she noted. You'll need to demonstrate that external relationships enhance rather than diminish your academic credibility. The warning was prescient. By December, I began noticing subtle resistance from departmental colleagues who were uncomfortable with my enhanced external profile and increased visibility within university administration. The resistance manifested through exclusion from informal conversations, skeptical comments about the academic value of policy work, and suggestions that my consulting activities might conflict with university responsibilities. Dr. Patricia Williams was the most vocal critic, though she maintained diplomatic language that avoided direct confrontation. During a faculty meeting discussion of workload policies, she made oblique references to faculty members who might be prioritizing external activities over institutional obligations. We should ensure that consulting and policy engagement complement rather than replace traditional academic responsibilities, Williams observed, her tone suggesting concern about unnamed colleagues who might be neglecting their primary duties. Excellence in research and teaching must remain our primary criteria for evaluating faculty performance. The criticism was clearly directed at me, though Williams avoided explicit identification that would force direct confrontation. She was positioning my external engagement as potentially problematic while reinforcing traditional evaluation criteria that emphasized internal over external validation. But Williams had made a strategic error by raising these concerns during a faculty meeting where other colleagues could observe the dynamics and evaluate the arguments. Several faculty members who had benefited from my alumni connections and consulting insights recognized that Williams was essentially arguing against exactly the kind of external relationship building that was generating opportunities for their own research and student placement. Dr. Robert Kim from International Relations provided immediate pushback against Williams' implicit criticism. Rachel's policy engagement has enhanced our department's reputation and provided valuable opportunities for student internships and research collaboration, he observed. We should be encouraging rather than questioning external partnerships that benefit our entire program. The support was significant because it came from a senior faculty member who understood both academic standards and institutional politics. Kim was essentially arguing that my external activities were enhancing rather than compromising departmental interests, which undermined Williams's attempt to frame policy engagement as problematic or inappropriate. Other colleagues offered similar perspectives that positioned my consulting work as valuable institutional service rather than potentially conflicting external activity. The faculty meeting ended with Williams clearly frustrated that her attempt to marginalize my external engagement had instead generated support for exactly the kind of relationship building she was questioning. But the incident also revealed how my enhanced external profile was creating anxiety among colleagues who felt threatened by changing promotion standards and evolving criteria for academic success. Williams and her allies recognized that my approach to career development represented a fundamental challenge to traditional academic hierarchies and established patterns of faculty advancement. The resistance was predictable but also strategically manageable. Rather than defending my external activities against criticism, I began demonstrating how policy engagement and alumni relationships were generating resources and opportunities that benefited everyone in the department. The strategy transformed potential opposition into stakeholder support by showing how my success contributed to collective institutional advancement. My third strategic move involved systematically building relationships with university administrators who controlled resources and made decisions about academic programming and faculty advancement. Most faculty members maintained minimal contact with senior administration beyond formal reporting requirements, viewing such relationships as either unnecessary or professionally inappropriate. But my fellowship year had taught me that university leaders were increasingly seeking faculty partners who could help achieve institutional objectives that extended far beyond traditional academic metrics. Presidents and provosts needed faculty members who could articulate the practical value of higher education to external constituencies, build relationships with potential donors and partners, and demonstrate measurable impact that justified continued investment in academic programs. I began attending university-wide events, where I could interact with senior administrators in informal settings that allowed natural relationship development. Board meetings, donor receptions, and strategic planning sessions provided opportunities to demonstrate my understanding of institutional challenges, while also showcasing the kind of external connections that enhanced university competitiveness. President Hayes was particularly interested in my work with State Department officials and international development organizations. During a reception for visiting dignitaries, he approached me for detailed conversation about how academic research could better inform policy development while also enhancing university reputation for practical relevance. Your consulting work represents exactly the kind of engagement that trustees want to see from faculty members, President Hayes confided during our discussion. Board members are impressed by scholars who can demonstrate clear connections between academic expertise and practical problem solving. The conversation confirmed what I'd suspected about evolving criteria for faculty success within university leadership. Senior administrators were prioritizing faculty members who could build external relationships that enhanced institutional reputation and generated resources for continued program development. But President Hayes also provided intelligence about internal dynamics that would be crucial for my long-term strategic planning. We're facing increased competition for students, faculty, and funding that makes external engagement essential for sustainability, he explained. Universities that can't demonstrate practical value and measurable impact are going to struggle to maintain their competitive position. This information was invaluable for understanding how promotion decisions would be made in an environment where traditional academic credentials were necessary but insufficient for advancement. Faculty members who could generate external validation and institutional value would have significant advantages in personnel processes, regardless of their standing within departmental hierarchies. My relationship with President Hayes also provided access to information about university strategic planning and resource allocation that most faculty members never received. I learned about upcoming initiatives in international programming, planned expansions in policy research, and new requirements for external partnership development that would create opportunities for faculty members with appropriate expertise and connections. The intelligence allowed me to position myself strategically for opportunities before they were announced publicly, while also providing insights about institutional priorities that informed my approach to research and service activities. Instead of responding reactively to university initiatives, I could anticipate developments and prepare proposals that aligned with administrative objectives. By February, my systematic relationship building had created a network of internal and external connections that provided sustainable support for continued career advancement, while also generating resources that enhanced my value to multiple constituencies. Alumni viewed me as their primary liaison to Westfield University. Government officials treated me as a trusted advisor whose expertise enhanced their decision-making effectiveness. University administrators saw me as a faculty partner who could help achieve institutional objectives that extended beyond traditional academic metrics. Most importantly, these relationships were mutually reinforcing in ways that provided protection against the kind of internal marginalization that Williams and her allies could impose through departmental mechanisms. External stakeholders valued my expertise regardless of departmental politics, while university leadership appreciated my contributions to institutional mission regardless of collegial approval. The network also provided multiple sources of validation and opportunity that made me less dependent on traditional academic advancement for professional success and personal satisfaction. I was building what business strategists called optionality, alternative pathways for career development that reduced risk while expanding possibilities for future growth. Dr. Susan Clark observed the transformation during one of our coffee meetings in early March. "You've become someone that people need rather than someone who needs institutional approval," she noted, with obvious admiration. "That's exactly the kind of leverage that allows faculty members to shape their own career trajectories." Susan's observation captured precisely what I'd been working to achieve through systematic external relationship building and strategic internal positioning. Instead of hoping for departmental approval and institutional advancement, I was creating conditions where multiple constituencies competed for access to my expertise and collaboration. But the most satisfying development was recognition that my approach to career development was generating exactly the kind of institutional value that university leadership was seeking from faculty members who aspired to senior academic positions. While Michael continued focusing on traditional tenure requirements, I was demonstrating capabilities that positioned me for advancement opportunities that exceeded anything available through departmental promotion processes. The spring semester brought confirmation that my strategic approach was working exactly as planned. External consulting opportunities continued expanding, with new contracts from government agencies and private organizations that valued my expertise in Middle Eastern affairs and conflict resolution. Alumni relationships were generating funding proposals and partnership opportunities that enhanced departmental resources, while also providing internships and career opportunities for students. Most importantly, university leadership was beginning to view me as someone whose judgment and expertise were valuable for institutional decision-making that extended far beyond my official faculty responsibilities. President Hayes included me in strategic planning discussions about international programming. Development officers consulted me about potential donors and partnership opportunities. Board members requested briefings on geopolitical developments that might affect university operations. The access was both personally gratifying and strategically valuable for long-term career planning. I was building relationships with people who controlled university resources and made decisions about academic leadership appointments. My external reputation was enhancing my internal standing in ways that traditional scholarly accomplishments alone could never achieve. But perhaps the most significant development was growing recognition from faculty colleagues that my approach to external engagement was generating benefits for everyone in the department. Alumni relationships were providing guest lecture opportunities and internship placements that enhanced teaching effectiveness. Consulting contracts were generating supplemental funding for research and conference travel. Government connections were creating opportunities for policy impact that increased the practical relevance of academic work. The collective benefits were transforming potential opposition into stakeholder support, as colleagues recognized that my success contributed to shared institutional advancement. Even faculty members who had initially been skeptical about external engagement were beginning to seek my advice about building their own relationships with practitioners and policymakers. Dr. Jennifer Walsh captured the evolving sentiment during a faculty discussion about promotion standards and evaluation criteria. "Rachel has demonstrated that external engagement and policy relevance can enhance rather than compromise academic excellence," she observed. Her work provides a model for how faculty members can build broader constituencies while maintaining scholarly rigor. The endorsement was particularly valuable because it came from a senior colleague who understood both academic standards and institutional politics. Jennifer was essentially arguing that my approach to career development represented best practices for faculty advancement in competitive higher education environments. By May, I had transformed from a marginalized assistant professor seeking departmental approval into a university-wide resource whose expertise and connections were valued by multiple constituencies, both internal and external to the institution. The network I'd built provided sustainable support for continued career advancement, while also generating resources that enhanced Westfield's competitive position in higher education. But more importantly, I had demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership capabilities and strategic thinking that university administrators were seeking from faculty members who aspired to senior academic positions. While my colleagues continued focusing on traditional promotion criteria, I was building qualifications for advancement opportunities that transcended departmental boundaries and institutional limitations. The game was changing in my favor, and Michael remained completely oblivious to how thoroughly the rules had shifted since our divorce. His focus on satisfying minimum requirements for tenure reflected fundamental misunderstanding of evolving academic culture and changing criteria for institutional success. Meanwhile, I was building alternative sources of power and influence that would soon position me to shape the very systems within which his career advancement would be evaluated. The woman he'd dismissed as professionally irrelevant was becoming someone whose judgment would determine his professional future. Justice was approaching, but it would arrive wearing the mask of institutional excellence and strategic leadership rather than personal revenge. The most satisfying victories were those that appeared to be natural consequences of merit and capability rather than calculated retribution. The foundation was complete. Now I just needed to wait for the perfect opportunity to demonstrate exactly how thoroughly the power dynamics had shifted, since Michael's betrayal had taught me that in academic environments, only results mattered. The opportunity materialized on a gray Thursday morning in October when Dean Margaret Foster announced her resignation during what should have been a routine faculty senate meeting. Her voice carried the weary tone of someone who had spent 15 years navigating academic politics and budgetary constraints, and was finally ready to escape to the simpler world of private consulting. After considerable reflection, I've decided to accept a position with McKinsey & Company's education practice, Dean Foster explained to the assembled faculty representatives. My departure will be effective at the end of this academic year, providing sufficient time for a comprehensive search process. The announcement sent immediate ripples through the room as department chairs and senior faculty began calculating the implications for their own career trajectories and institutional influence. A dean search at Westfield University was a rare opportunity that occurred perhaps once every decade, and the successful candidate would control academic policy, faculty advancement, and resource allocation for years to come. I maintained appropriate composure while internally recognizing that Dean Foster's departure represented exactly the advancement opportunity I'd been systematically preparing for, through 3 years of strategic relationship building and external engagement. My network of government contacts, alumni relationships, and board member connections had positioned me perfectly for consideration as Foster's successor, despite my unconventional timeline for such rapid institutional advancement. Dr. Patricia Williams leaned forward in her seat with barely concealed interest, clearly viewing the dean's search as validation of her own administrative aspirations. Williams had been building toward senior leadership for years, accumulating service assignments and cultivating relationships with established faculty who valued traditional academic credentials and departmental loyalty over external engagement and revenue generation. But Williams had fundamentally misunderstood how university leadership priorities had evolved during her methodical climb through internal hierarchies. While she focused on satisfying traditional promotion criteria and gaining approval from departmental colleagues, institutional decision-makers were prioritizing candidates who could demonstrate external impact and generate resources that enhanced competitive positioning in higher education markets. President Hayes concluded the Faculty Senate meeting by outlining the search timeline and committee composition. We'll establish a search committee that includes department chairs, senior faculty representatives, and board members, he announced. The process will necessarily be comprehensive, with national advertising and campus interviews for final candidates. Our goal is to identify leadership that can advance Westfield's academic excellence while strengthening our external partnerships and institutional sustainability. The language was carefully chosen to signal university priorities without explicitly excluding any potential candidates. But experienced academic politicians understood that phrases like external partnerships and institutional sustainability indicated preferences for candidates who possessed exactly the kind of qualifications I'd been developing through my consulting work and alumni engagement initiatives. After the meeting, I approached President Hayes with the respectful directness of someone who understood both institutional protocols and strategic timing. I wanted to express my interest in the dean position, I said during our brief hallway conversation. My work with the Center for International Affairs and External Partnership Development has provided valuable preparation for academic leadership responsibilities. President Hayes smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose strategic planning was proceeding exactly as anticipated. I was hoping you'd consider applying, Rachel. Your success with external relationship building and revenue generation represents exactly the kind of leadership capability we need for institutional advancement. The encouragement was significant but also carefully diplomatic. President Hayes couldn't explicitly endorse my candidacy during the early stages of a search process that required appearance of open competition and thorough consideration of qualified applicants. But his positive response confirmed that my systematic preparation had positioned me as a serious contender for university leadership. More importantly, our conversation revealed that senior administration viewed my rapid advancement as appropriate rather than problematic. While critics like Williams questioned whether external engagement could substitute for traditional academic credentials, university leadership appreciated practical results and institutional value over conventional promotion timelines and departmental approval. The dean search announcement triggered immediate speculation throughout campus about potential candidates and their respective qualifications. Faculty members who had built careers through traditional academic advancement expressed surprise that someone with my timeline would be considered for senior administrative appointment. But colleagues who had benefited from my external relationships and revenue generation recognized that my candidacy reflected evolving criteria for institutional leadership. Dr. Jennifer Walsh provided valuable intelligence about internal faculty reactions during one of our regular lunch meetings. "Most people acknowledge your impressive external accomplishments," she reported, "but there's definitely concern about whether rapid advancement might set inappropriate precedents for academic promotion." The resistance was predictable and would need to be addressed through careful attention to faculty governance concerns and collaborative decision-making processes. But Jennifer also noted significant support from colleagues who appreciated practical benefits of external engagement and understood changing competitive pressures facing higher education institutions. "Department chairs who've worked with you on international programming are enthusiastic about your candidacy," Jennifer continued. "They've seen how your government contacts and alumni relationships generate opportunities that benefit their faculty and students. They're less concerned about promotion timeline than about your ability to enhance institutional resources and reputation." This intelligence confirmed my assessment that internal support would come primarily from pragmatic colleagues who measured administrative effectiveness by results, rather than adherence to traditional advancement patterns. Faculty members who had direct experience with my work appreciated practical value of external relationship building and revenue generation for enhancing academic programs and career opportunities. But I also understood that successful candidacy would require addressing concerns about institutional governance and faculty autonomy that inevitably arose when universities considered non-traditional appointments to senior leadership positions. Any campaign strategy would need to demonstrate commitment to academic excellence and collaborative governance, while also showcasing capabilities for external engagement and institutional advancement. My first strategic move involved systematic consultation with department chairs and senior faculty about their priorities for academic leadership and their assessment of institutional challenges facing Westfield University. Rather than presenting predetermined agenda for administrative reform, I positioned myself as someone seeking to understand faculty perspectives and build consensus around shared objectives for institutional development. The consultation process revealed significant frustration with administrative bureaucracy and resource constraints that limited academic innovation and faculty recruitment. Department chairs wanted leadership that could streamline decision-making processes while also generating external funding that would enhance program capabilities and competitive positioning. "We need someone who understands both academic culture and business realities," explained Dr. Robert Kim during our conversation about international studies programming. "The dean position requires balancing faculty autonomy with institutional accountability, supporting scholarly independence, while also demonstrating practical value to external constituencies." Kim's observation captured exactly the kind of integrated leadership approach that I'd been developing through my consulting work and alumni engagement. Unlike candidates who excelled either in academic scholarship or administrative management, I had demonstrated ability to bridge scholarly expertise and practical implementation while generating resources that benefited multiple stakeholder groups. Dr. Susan Clark provided additional perspective on faculty expectations for administrative leadership during one of our coffee meetings. "People want someone who can protect academic freedom while also positioning the university for competitive success," she noted. "That's a difficult balance that requires sophisticated understanding of both internal and external pressures." Susan's insight highlighted exactly why my unconventional preparation might actually provide advantages over traditional academic candidates. While conventional administrators focused either on internal governance or external relationship building, I had developed capabilities in both areas that were essential for effective leadership in competitive higher education environments. But Susan also warned about potential resistance from faculty members who viewed rapid advancement as threatening to established promotion norms and institutional traditions. Some colleagues will argue that external accomplishments can't substitute for sustained academic service and proven institutional loyalty, she observed. You'll need to demonstrate deep commitment to faculty governance and scholarly excellence. The warning was valuable for refining my campaign strategy to address legitimate concerns, while also showcasing qualifications that distinguished my candidacy from other potential applicants. I needed to position external achievements as enhancing rather than replacing traditional academic credentials, demonstrating how government consulting and alumni engagement strengthened rather than compromised my understanding of university mission and faculty priorities. My second strategic move involved intensive preparation for the formal application process, including development of comprehensive vision statements and supporting documentation that would demonstrate both administrative capability and institutional commitment. Unlike typical faculty promotion cases that emphasized research productivity and teaching effectiveness, Dean applications required articulation of strategic leadership philosophy and practical plans for institutional advancement. I spent weeks developing detailed proposals for enhancing Westfield's competitive position through expanded international programming, strengthened alumni engagement, and enhanced policy relevance that would attract external funding, while also supporting faculty research and student opportunities. Each initiative built directly on relationships I'd established through consulting work and alumni networking, while also addressing institutional needs that had been identified through strategic planning processes. The application portfolio included comprehensive financial projections showing how external partnership development could generate revenue that exceeded administrative costs while providing sustainable funding for academic program enhancement. I demonstrated how government consulting relationships could create internship opportunities for students while also providing research support for faculty interested in policy engagement. Most importantly, I articulated a vision for academic leadership that balanced faculty autonomy with institutional accountability, emphasizing collaborative governance while also acknowledging external pressures that required strategic adaptation and innovative resource generation. The approach positioned me as someone who understood both academic culture and competitive realities facing modern universities. The supporting documentation included endorsement letters from government officials, foundation leaders, and alumni, who could speak to my effectiveness in building external relationships and generating practical value from academic expertise. David Chen from the State Department highlighted my ability to translate scholarly research into policy analysis that enhanced decision-making effectiveness. Sarah Reynolds from International Development Consulting praised my understanding of implementation challenges that academic researchers often overlooked. But the most strategically important endorsements came from current faculty colleagues who could address concerns about my commitment to academic governance and scholarly excellence. Dr. Jennifer Walsh provided detailed assessment of my collaborative leadership style and respect for faculty autonomy. Professor Morrison, despite his initial skepticism about my rapid advancement, wrote enthusiastically about my organizational capabilities and strategic vision. The breadth of support demonstrated that my candidacy appealed to multiple university constituencies, rather than just external stakeholders. Internal faculty appreciated my understanding of academic culture and commitment to scholarly rigor. External partners valued my ability to bridge research and practical implementation. University administrators recognized my potential for generating resources and enhancing institutional competitiveness. While I prepared application materials, campus speculation about the dean search intensified as potential candidates began positioning themselves for consideration. Dr. Patricia Williams launched what amounted to an informal campaign emphasizing her extensive service record and deep institutional knowledge gained through decades of departmental leadership and faculty governance participation. Williams' approach reflected traditional academic values and conventional understanding of administrative preparation. She highlighted her experience with budget management, personnel evaluation, and policy implementation that demonstrated competence in routine administrative functions. Her endorsements came primarily from senior faculty who valued institutional continuity and incremental rather than transformational change. But Williams' campaign also revealed fundamental misunderstanding of evolving criteria for academic leadership in competitive higher education environments. While she emphasized internal qualifications and institutional loyalty, university leadership was prioritizing candidates who could generate external resources and enhance competitive positioning through innovative programming and strategic partnerships. The contrast between our respective approaches became apparent during informal faculty discussions about dean search criteria and candidate qualifications. Williams focused on traditional administrative competencies and internal relationship management, while I emphasized external engagement capabilities and revenue generation potential that could enhance institutional sustainability and academic excellence. Dr. Robert Kim observed the different campaign strategies during a faculty reception in November. Patricia represents continuity and proven administrative competence, he noted during our conversation about search process dynamics. But you represent innovation and external engagement that might be necessary for competitive positioning in changing higher education markets. Kim's analysis captured precisely how faculty members were evaluating our respective candidacies according to their own priorities for institutional development and academic advancement. Colleagues who valued stability and traditional governance preferred Williams' conventional qualifications, while those who recognized competitive pressures and resource constraints were attracted to my external relationship-building capabilities. But the most revealing development was growing recognition among faculty that external engagement and revenue generation were becoming essential rather than optional qualifications for academic leadership. Even colleagues who initially questioned my rapid advancement began acknowledging that government consulting and alumni relationships provided valuable preparation for administrative responsibilities that extended beyond traditional scholarly activities. My third strategic move involved leveraging board member relationships and external stakeholder support to demonstrate broad constituency backing that extended beyond internal faculty approval. University trustees and external partners could provide validation that complemented rather than substituted for academic credentials, showing how my candidacy served multiple institutional interests simultaneously. Margaret Patterson, who served on the Board of Trustees' Academic Affairs Committee, had become particularly interested in my work through our collaboration on international development initiatives. During a reception for visiting scholars, she approached me for detailed conversation about my vision for academic leadership and strategic priorities for institutional advancement. Your success with external partnership development represents exactly the kind of innovation that distinguishes competitive universities, Margaret observed during our discussion. Board members are impressed by faculty who can demonstrate measurable impact and generate resources that enhance academic programs. Margaret's endorsement was significant not just for its content but for its public nature, at an event attended by faculty, administrators, and other board members. She was essentially signaling that my candidacy had strong trustee support, which would influence how other search committee members evaluated my qualifications and strategic vision. But Margaret also provided intelligence about board priorities that would be crucial for refining my campaign strategy and application materials. Trustees are concerned about competitive positioning and financial sustainability, she explained. We need leadership that can balance academic excellence with practical resource management and external relationship building. This information confirmed that university governance was prioritizing exactly the kind of integrated leadership capabilities that I'd been developing through my consulting work and alumni engagement. While traditional academic candidates emphasized either scholarly credentials or administrative experience, board members wanted leaders who could excel in both areas while also generating external support for institutional advancement. The board member support was complemented by endorsements from government officials and foundation leaders who could speak to my effectiveness in building partnerships that enhanced both academic research and practical policy implementation. These external stakeholders provided validation that was completely independent of internal university politics and immune to the kind of departmental resistance that Williams and her allies could mobilize through faculty governance channels. David Chen arranged for 3 State Department colleagues to submit letters supporting my candidacy, emphasizing how my consulting work had enhanced American diplomatic effectiveness while also advancing academic understanding of international relations. Foundation leaders who had funded my research projects highlighted my ability to translate scholarly expertise into practical applications that addressed social challenges they were mandated to solve. The external endorsements served multiple strategic purposes beyond simple candidate support. They demonstrated that my work had achieved recognition from stakeholders who evaluated academic contributions according to practical impact rather than disciplinary reputation. They showed how university appointment of someone with my qualifications would enhance institutional relationships with government agencies and funding organizations. Most importantly, they provided evidence that my success reflected merit-based achievement rather than political favoritism or preferential treatment. By December, my systematic campaign had generated support from multiple constituency groups that would influence search committee deliberations and final selection decisions. Faculty colleagues appreciated my commitment to academic governance and collaborative leadership. Board members valued my external relationship-building capabilities and revenue generation potential. Government officials and foundation leaders provided validation that was completely independent of internal university politics. But perhaps the most significant development was growing recognition that my candidacy represented exactly the kind of innovative leadership that Westfield University needed to maintain competitive positioning in changing higher education markets. Even faculty members who had initially questioned my qualifications began acknowledging that external engagement and resource generation were becoming essential capabilities for academic administration. The momentum was building exactly as I'd planned, but I also understood that Williams and her allies would likely escalate their resistance as my candidacy gained credibility and external support. Traditional academic politicians often responded to innovative challenges by questioning procedural legitimacy, rather than engaging with substantive arguments about qualifications and institutional needs. The escalation began during a faculty senate meeting in January, when Williams raised concerns about search process transparency and candidate evaluation criteria. Her comments were carefully crafted to appear supportive of open competition while actually questioning whether rapid advancement and external engagement could substitute for traditional academic preparation and institutional service. We should ensure that Dean's search criteria maintain appropriate emphasis on scholarly excellence and proven commitment to faculty governance, Williams observed during discussion of search committee procedures. Administrative leadership requires deep understanding of academic culture that can only be gained through sustained institutional service and collaborative relationship building with faculty colleagues. The criticism was diplomatically phrased but clearly directed at my candidacy as an example of insufficient preparation for academic leadership responsibilities. Williams was arguing that external accomplishments were less valuable than internal service, and that rapid advancement represented inappropriate prioritization of innovation over institutional continuity. But Williams had made a strategic error by raising these concerns during a public forum, where other faculty members could evaluate her arguments and respond with alternative perspectives. Several colleagues who had benefited from my external relationships and revenue generation immediately pushed back against her implicit criticism of external engagement and non-traditional qualifications. Dr. Jennifer Walsh provided particularly effective counter-argument that reframed the discussion around institutional needs rather than traditional advancement patterns. Competitive higher education environments require leadership that can balance academic excellence with external relationship building and resource generation, she observed. Traditional qualifications remain important, but they're insufficient for addressing contemporary challenges facing university administration. Walsh's response was strategically brilliant because it positioned my external engagement as complementing, rather than replacing traditional academic credentials. She was arguing that changing institutional needs required expanded rather than diminished qualifications for administrative leadership, which made Williams' criticism appear backward-looking rather than appropriately cautious. Other faculty members offered similar perspectives that supported innovative approaches to academic leadership while maintaining respect for traditional governance and scholarly excellence. The faculty senate discussion ended with Williams clearly frustrated that her attempt to raise concerns about my candidacy had instead generated support for exactly the kind of external engagement she was questioning. But the incident also revealed how my rapid advancement was creating anxiety among colleagues who felt threatened by changing promotion standards and evolving criteria for academic success. Williams and her allies recognized that my approach to career development represented fundamental challenge to traditional academic hierarchies and established patterns of faculty advancement. The resistance intensified during February as the dean search moved toward final candidate selection and campus interview scheduling. Williams began making direct appeals to senior faculty about the importance of maintaining traditional standards for administrative appointment, arguing that external engagement could not substitute for sustained institutional service and proven commitment to faculty governance. Her campaign strategy emphasized continuity and stability over innovation and change, positioning herself as someone who would protect established academic culture, while suggesting that my candidacy represented potentially disruptive transformation of university priorities and governance structures. The approach appealed to faculty members who valued traditional promotion patterns and were uncomfortable with rapid advancement based on external accomplishments. But Williams' resistance also provided opportunities for me to demonstrate exactly the kind of collaborative leadership style and respectful engagement with faculty concerns that would be essential for effective academic administration. Rather than responding defensively to criticism or dismissing legitimate governance concerns, I used faculty meetings and informal conversations to address questions about my commitment to academic freedom and collaborative decision-making. The approach transformed potential opposition into stakeholder engagement, as colleagues recognized that I was willing to listen to their concerns and incorporate their perspectives into my vision for institutional leadership. Faculty members who had initially been skeptical about my qualifications began appreciating my respectful attention to their priorities and my sophisticated understanding of academic governance challenges. Dr. Susan Clark observed the evolving dynamics during one of our regular conversations. "Your response to criticism has been much more effective than Patricia's attack strategy," she noted. Faculty members appreciate leaders who can engage constructively with opposition rather than dismissing it or responding defensively. Clark's observation highlighted exactly why my preparation for academic leadership had emphasized collaborative relationship building and respectful engagement with diverse perspectives. Unlike traditional academic politicians who succeeded through factional alliance building and opposition marginalization, I was demonstrating ability to build consensus around shared objectives while addressing legitimate concerns about governance and institutional direction. The final phase of my campaign involved intensive preparation for campus interviews and public presentations that would provide opportunities to articulate my vision for academic leadership, while also demonstrating collaborative engagement with faculty concerns and external stakeholder priorities. Unlike typical job interviews that focused on individual qualifications, dean searches required comprehensive assessment of leadership philosophy, strategic vision, and practical capabilities for institutional advancement. I spent weeks developing detailed presentations that addressed three key themes: enhancing academic excellence through external partnerships, strengthening faculty governance through collaborative decision-making, and building institutional sustainability through strategic resource development. Each theme reflected priorities that had emerged through my consultation with faculty, board members, and external stakeholders, demonstrating how my candidacy served multiple constituency interests rather than promoting narrow personal agenda. The presentation materials included specific proposals for academic program enhancement, faculty development initiatives, and external partnership expansion that would generate measurable benefits for university competitiveness while also supporting scholarly excellence and institutional mission. I provided detailed financial projections showing how external relationship building could create sustainable funding streams that reduce dependence on tuition revenue while expanding opportunities for faculty research and student experiences. Most importantly, I articulated leadership philosophy that positioned external engagement as enhancing rather than competing with traditional academic values, demonstrating how government consulting and alumni relationships could support faculty research while also generating practical applications that enhanced university reputation and social impact. The campus interview was scheduled for the first week of March, with Michael's tenure review following immediately afterward. The timing created maximum visibility for both processes while ensuring that university leadership would make crucial decisions with complete information about available talent and strategic opportunities for institutional advancement. As I prepared for what would likely be the most important professional presentation of my career, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought me to this moment of opportunity. 3 years after Michael's betrayal had shattered my illusions about academic fairness and institutional support, I was positioned to assume leadership that would allow me to reshape the very environment that had once seemed designed to exclude people like me. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of this approaching triumph was recognition that Michael remained completely oblivious to how thoroughly the power dynamics had shifted since our divorce. While he continued focusing on traditional tenure requirements and departmental relationship building, I was building qualifications for institutional leadership that would soon position me to evaluate his professional advancement according to criteria that emphasized exactly the kind of external impact and collaborative excellence he had never developed. The game was approaching its climax, and this time I would control the outcome. Justice was finally within reach, dressed in the respectable clothing of institutional advancement and academic leadership rather than personal revenge. The most effective victories were those that appeared to result from merit and capability rather than calculated retribution. Everything was in position for the final act of a drama that Michael had unwittingly set in motion 3 years earlier, when he chose ambition over loyalty and temporary attraction over sustainable partnership. Soon he would learn exactly what it felt like to have his professional fate determined by someone he had dismissed as personally and academically irrelevant. The irony was so perfect it seemed orchestrated by whatever gods governed academic politics and poetic justice. The call came on a crisp March morning, President Hayes' voice carrying the weight of institutional transformation. "Rachel, I'm pleased to inform you that the Board of Trustees has unanimously approved your appointment as Dean of Faculty, effective July 1st. The moment felt both surreal and inevitable. 3 years after Michael's betrayal had shattered my academic world, I now held the exact authority that would soon determine his professional fate. "I'm honored by your confidence," I replied, my voice steady despite the magnitude of this reversal. The announcement rippled through campus like wildfire. Faculty members who had supported my external engagement celebrated, while traditionalists like Dr. Patricia Williams whispered concerns about my rapid advancement. But their resistance mattered little now. The game had fundamentally changed, and I controlled the board. Michael's reaction was telling in its complete obliviousness. He congratulated me with formal politeness, apparently viewing my appointment as unrelated to his own upcoming tenure review. The man who had dismissed me as academically irrelevant couldn't fathom that his former wife now possessed absolute authority over his career survival. April arrived with Michael's tenure case landing squarely on my desk. As the newly appointed Dean of Faculty, I would chair the review committee and make the final recommendation to President Hayes. The irony was so exquisite it felt orchestrated by the universe itself. I opened Michael's file with clinical detachment, though my pulse quickened as I reviewed 3 years of mediocre performance. His research output was adequate, but uninspiring, generating minimal external interest or policy impact. His teaching evaluations showed competence without excellence, and his service record revealed the same calculating self-interest that had characterized our marriage. The tenure committee meeting convened on a Thursday afternoon. Michael sat in the conference room lobby, nervously adjusting his tie while I called the session to order. The same mahogany table where I'd once been marginalized now served as my seat of institutional power. "We're here to evaluate Dr. Michael Bennett's application for tenure," I announced, maintaining perfect professional composure. The committee members, unaware of our personal history, proceeded with their assessment based purely on academic merit. The discussion was damning. External reviewers had used words like adequate and competent, but never exceptional or groundbreaking. His recent work showed declining productivity and minimal innovation. Most critically, his service contributions were strategically minimal, avoiding challenging assignments that might have demonstrated institutional commitment. Dr. Jennifer Walsh summed up the committee's growing concerns. While Dr. Bennett meets basic requirements, his work lacks the excellence and institutional engagement we expect for permanent appointment. His trajectory suggests maintenance rather than growth. As the discussion concluded, I felt the weight of institutional authority and personal vindication converging in this single moment. The committee's assessment aligned perfectly with my own evaluation of Michael's limitations, both professional and personal. Based on our thorough review, I announced, my voice carrying across the silent room, I recommend denial of tenure for Dr. Michael Bennett. His work, while competent, does not demonstrate the excellence and institutional commitment required for permanent faculty appointment. The committee nodded in agreement. The decision was unanimous, supported by objective evidence and institutional standards. Michael's fate was sealed not by personal revenge, but by his own inadequacies finally being properly evaluated. When Michael requested a meeting to discuss the decision, he arrived at my office with barely contained confusion and frustration. "I don't understand what went wrong," he protested. "My work meets all the basic requirements." "Basic requirements aren't sufficient anymore," I replied with clinical precision. "The committee evaluated your contributions according to excellence standards, not minimum thresholds." As Michael processed the implications, I watched recognition dawn in his eyes. The woman he'd abandoned for his graduate student now controlled his professional destiny. The colleague he'd dismissed as emotional and unsuited for serious academic work was demonstrating exactly the strategic leadership that modern universities demanded. "This feels personal," he said finally, grasping for explanations that would preserve his dignity. "Dr. Bennett," I replied, emphasizing the formal distance. "Tenure decisions are based on academic qualifications and institutional standards. The committee's recommendation reflects objective evaluation of your research, teaching, and service, according to established faculty governance criteria." Michael left my office that day a defeated man, finally understanding how completely he'd been outmaneuvered by someone he'd never considered a worthy opponent. His terminal contract would expire in June, ending his career at Westfield, while mine was just beginning its most influential phase. 6 months later, I stood in my dean's office, watching autumn transform the campus into brilliant displays of gold and crimson. Michael had quietly departed for a lesser position at a regional university, his dreams of academic prestige reduced to adequate performance at an institution that matched his actual capabilities. The transformation was complete. The marginalized faculty wife had become the institutional leader, wielding the same power structures that had once excluded her to ensure that excellence, not mediocrity, determined advancement. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge comes dressed as professional competence and institutional improvement. Justice had been served through merit rather than malice, which made the victory even sweeter. I'd built something better than what existed before, while Michael had simply revealed the limitations that careful evaluation inevitably exposed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. The mahogany conference table stretched between us like a battlefield, and Dr. Michael Bennett sat at the far end with his perfectly pressed suit and that same confident smile that had once made my heart skip. Now it just made my stomach turn. The tenure review committee had been deliberating for 2 hours, and Michael kept glancing at me with barely concealed smugness, clearly believing his charm and connections would carry him through this final hurdle. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What he didn't know was that every question asked, every document reviewed, every concern raised about his research productivity had been carefully orchestrated. What he couldn't imagine was that the woman he'd left devastated 3 years ago now held his entire academic future in her hands. What he would never suspect was that Dr. Rachel Martinez, the quiet assistant professor he'd discarded for his 24-year-old graduate student, was now dean of faculty at Westfield University. The irony was so perfect it almost felt scripted. Here was Michael, sitting in the same conference room where he'd once dismissed my research as interesting but not quite tenure-track material, waiting for my decision on whether his career would continue or end. The same man who'd told his colleagues I was too emotional for serious academic work was about to learn exactly how strategic emotion could be when channeled properly. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. From the day I first walked into Hamilton Hall as a bright-eyed assistant professor, completely unprepared for the lesson Michael Bennett would teach me about power, betrayal, and the long game of academic revenge. 8 years ago, I thought I'd found my perfect life. Dr. Rachel Martinez, freshly minted PhD in political science, specializing in Middle Eastern foreign policy, ready to conquer the academic world with my dissertation on diplomatic strategies in post-conflict regions. Westfield University had offered me an assistant professor position, and I'd accepted with the enthusiasm of someone who believed merit and hard work were all you needed to succeed in academia. I'd grown up in a working-class family in Arizona, where my father painted houses and my mother cleaned offices at night to pay for my education. Being the first person in my family to attend college, let alone earn a doctorate, felt like climbing Mount Everest. When I walked across that stage to receive my PhD, I thought the hardest part was behind me. I had no idea the real challenges were just beginning. Westfield University was everything I dreamed an academic institution could be. The campus sprawled across rolling hills in western Massachusetts, with brick buildings covered in ivy and Gothic architecture that whispered of centuries of scholarly tradition. Hamilton Hall, where the political science department was housed, felt like a temple to intellectual pursuit, with its high ceilings, tall windows, and walls lined with portraits of distinguished professors from decades past. My office was on the third floor, a cramped space I shared with another new hire, but I didn't care. I had a window overlooking the quad, shelves for my growing collection of books, and a nameplate that read Dr. Rachel Martinez, Assistant Professor of Political Science. Every morning, I'd arrive early and spend a few minutes just looking at that nameplate, reminding myself that I'd made it. The department orientation was held on a crisp September morning, and that's where I first saw Michael Bennett. He was everything that academia had taught me to respect. Tall, confident, with prematurely gray hair that gave him a distinguished appearance despite being only 32. When he spoke during the introductions, his voice carried the kind of authority that comes from never having to question whether you belong in a room. Dr. Michael Bennett, he'd said, standing with perfect posture. American political theory, specializing in democratic institutions, and